Have you heard of the term red pill? Have you ever heard of Gamergate? Do you know about the Manosphere? Have you heard of incels?
Yes, I have heard of the incels. They've always been with us. When you are 18 to 30 years old, this should be the most idealistic time you will ever have in your life, where you believe that you can change the world, where you want to change the world. You want to make the world a better place. And what do? We get a generation of young men who sound like they're in their 80s.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Talking Politics with Mom, where I, a progressive millennial, talk to my formerly conservative boomer mom about politics. Now, have you noticed that there's something going on with young men? Over 50% of them voted for Donald Trump, so something's definitely going on. They appear to be becoming more conservative, even as young women become increasingly progressive. In fact, the partisan gender gap among young people has nearly doubled in the past 25 years. I think one of the factors involved here is the influence of the media and ideological ecosystem known as the Manosphere. But when I would bring this up to my mom when we would talk politics, which is obviously something that we often do, it was clear that she had no idea what the hell I was talking about. So we thought we'd do an episode where I educate her a little bit about the world of pickup artists and men's rights activists and incels to see what she makes of it all. In other words, I'm going to be asking her to take the red pill and see whether or not she spits it out. But before we get started, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are so close to that 10,000 subscriber number, so it'd be really cool if this video helped us get over that hump. And remember, you can get early access and bonus clips on our Patreon. In fact, our patrons have probably already watched this video like way before you, so get on that. All right, let's get into it. Hi, Mom.
Hello, child.
So we thought we'd do something a little bit different today, where for part of it, you're going to be more or less sort of interviewing me and getting some information from me, because you had an idea for an episode about young men. First, before we get started, tell me why you were interested in doing a podcast about this topic.
Because I don't understand it at all. I don't understand what's going on. It seems like you have a generation of really young guys, who should be in the most idealistic, optimistic part of their lives. But they're very negative and sour and can't get a date, and they're angry about something. Angry enough so that they vote for Donald Trump, who is probably the best example of everything that's bad about being a man, a felon, a philanderer, dishonest, lying. And they think this is a good role model. But I'm concerned that they're so negative. What is going on with them?
I think some context is helpful here to talk about really what is happening with young men, because I looked back to 2008 to see the vote share, and I was in that demographic, the under 30 male demographic at that time, and 62% of us voted for Obama.
Of men?
Of young men.
Young men.
Yeah. 66% of people under 30 went for Obama, but still a pretty high percentage went for Obama of young men. And, back then I remember thinking that was going to continue. Old people who were more conservative would die off. Young people who were more liberal and more progressive would continue to grow. And eventually that would take over, the American political body. And, we were talking about at that point a permanent Democratic majority. You remember it was demographics or destiny was what everyone was saying. So clearly, the demographics, our destiny model is nonsense.
It's nonsense.
Demographics change their views, parties change, messages change. And we're undergoing that with young men right now. Now, I'm no longer part of the under 30 demographic, but the next I don't even know if it's a full generation since me, but the in the last election, men under 30 voted over 50% for Donald Trump. And so that's between 2008 and 2024, those numbers have completely turned around.
It's a huge shift.
I was trying to think, how do I answer, give you some information about what's going on with young men? I think it's very complicated. I don't fully understand it myself, but I was trying to track when I first started realizing that there was something going on. And I think that moment was around 2015. And
Okay.
it was with something called Gamergate. Have you ever heard of Gamergate?
No, never heard of Gamergate.
So right towards the end of Obama's era, there was this online fiasco that's frankly kind of hard to describe, but it was a series of things happening, and it became known as Gamergate. Basically, what happened was there was a woman who was making critiques of video games and talking about, certain misogynistic trends within games. There
Right.
were also certain women figures inside the gaming community that were making certain types of games that were maybe more geared towards women. And so what happened is this community of young men formed and created this backlash, this harassment campaign against these women. And they were organized, and they started forming communities, and articles would come out that would maybe talk about it and be critical of them. They would inundate that website, make the sponsors drop the website. And this went on for months and months, and it became known as Gamergate. So I remember that happening and just thinking, okay, this is some weird online thing. I didn't pay that much attention to it. But it turns out that that incident ended up sort of being a big moment for what would later become a movement of young men and a shift in their ideology towards the right.
I mean, I know from women gamers that I know that it's a horrific environment for women. Most of them change their names, their handle, whatever it's called, so that no one knows. But if you're on the mic, which I guess you can be with these games, people figure it out pretty quick. And she said, the person I talked to about this yesterday, she said that she witnessed grooming of these kids, of young kids, by older men who kind of induce them to I'll teach you the ins and outs of this game. And then they take it from there. They want the younger kids want to be, have a mentor on these games or whatever it is. And all of a sudden, it's like a gateway drug. You get them in with that, and then you start talking about women, and then you start using bad words for women, and then you start saying, they don't belong here. This is our space. And then you say they're doing it everywhere, and on and on. And suddenly kids who had no tendencies like this are calling women the C word and just feeling aggrieved and, like they're stealing something precious from these men. I mean, I don't know. When I heard that, I thought I should really have monitored your game use a lot more than I did. But I don't know the ins and outs of that world. I don't think parents do. And I don't think they realize that their sons are being turned into little monsters online.
Yeah, well, when I was young, this world did not exist. One thing, I didn't play that many video games. I was out playing with my video camera most of the time.
Right.
But even when I did play games, there wasn't this online social community. I wasn't wearing headphones and talking to other people. It was me and Dan, sitting next to each other playing games. So it was a very different world back then. I want to talk a little bit more about what lessons Gamergate can teach us, because there's some interesting elements to it. But first, I want to sort of give you a glossary of some of this community.
I guess I better know this.
What began with Gamergate has now, I think, morphed into something that many call the Manosphere. Do you know about the Manosphere?
Yes, It's like guys going to a bar except on steroids and in almost every aspect of your life.
Well, it's specifically a media ecosystem.
I see.
So it's
Mhm.
podcasts and YouTube shows and TikTok. It's social media content that's geared towards a certain message. What constitutes the manosphere is actually has a lot of diversity in some ways, diversity in terms of the issue sets that attract each group to the community, but they all sort of coalesce around some similar themes. So
Uh-huh.
first, I think this one might be a good one to start with. Have you heard of incels?
Yes, I have heard of the incels. They've always been with us.
Do you know what incel means?
Yeah, they're involuntarily celibate. Is that
Involuntarily
correct?
celibate. That's right.
Okay. Well, I feel bad for you. You might want to get a therapist.
Yeah, I mean, a therapy would be very good medicine for incels. Let me just sort of briefly describe the primary sort of ideology or thinking of incels. So incels have, created a culture, a subculture.
Uh-huh.
They gather together on forums like 8chan and 4chan, and I don't know what they're called now, some version of that. They've got terms and a belief system, but I think it starts with this idea. Back in the day, they posit, the way society worked was men and women are grouped by their attractiveness level and desirability, 1 to 10, right? Tens are the most
Mhm.
attractive, most desirable, and ones are the least desirable.
Uh-huh.
What they say is that back in the day, men who are ones and women who are ones would pair together.
You mean the least attractive of both of
The
them?
least attractive of both of them would pair together, and the tens would pair together, and the eights would pair together, and so on and so forth. That was the way the world worked.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. I don't mean to interrupt you, but this might explain why they are incels, because they clearly have no idea what women are looking for.
Yes.
Have they ever seen Sophia Loren's husband? I mean, women don't necessarily, and most women, in my experience, don't really care nearly as much. Once they're not teenagers in high school anymore, they don't care what a guy looks like. They care about his soul. They care about whether he's a caring person, a funny person, a compassionate person, whether he'll, all that kind of stuff. That's what women want. I mean, that's what most women want. And so the idea that that you have to be attractive to get a mate, for a man, that's just not true. For a woman, it's much more true.
Yeah,
But
that's
for
the
men,
irony.
it's just not true. I mean, a lot of 10 women have ugly husbands, you
Ye-
know?
Yeah.
They do. And they love them. And I mean, no. Oh boy. Who tells them this stuff?
Well, we'll get to that. But let me get to the next part of their equation.
Okay.
So that's the way it used to be. But here's the
Which it
way
never was.
it never was. But
Right.
here's the way it is now.
Mm,
So since the sexual revolution, according to them,
right.
now we live in a world where 10 men who they call Chads,
Chad.
Chad, yeah, like the name Chad. They
Okay.
call them Chads.
Okay. The Chads.
The Chads now get all the women.
The Chads get all the women.
All the women. So
The tens get all the women.
all the women, including the ones, because according to them, men will sleep with anybody. They don't care what they look like. So the Chads get the Stacys, which the Stacys are the tens. So the Chads get the tens, the nines, the eights, the sevens, all the way down, and they basically have a monopoly on the sexual marketplace,
I see. And they're not
leaving
that
no
many
one.
tens, right?
No, no, yeah. So it's a very small percentage of men who get all the women, and there's no one left over for
N-
them.
no one left over.
That's right.
Okay.
And that's why they're involuntarily celibate.
Uh, well, it kind of a backward way of reinforcing the old, feminist thing that you only need one man for 100 women. So what's the point of these other guys?
Right.
Sorry, I don't think that. I don't think that. But
See,
I
this
mean,
is
it's just hilarious that they adopted the thing that they probably hate if they actually heard it coming out of the mouth of a woman.
oh yeah. Well, that's the other thing is they have a lot of animosity towards women.
They should have the animosity toward the tens who are hogging all the women. Why don't
Well,
they take this up with the tens?
with the Chads,
Yeah, with the Chads. Like, Chad, how many women do you need? Women outnumber men a little bit. So that means that a very small percentage of men, they must have harems. They must have hundreds, thousands of women. Surely they could part with some of them.
I'm not sure how much ire they send towards the Chads. It seems to be, as far as I can tell, mostly directed towards the women. And this situation was able to exist because of the sexual revolution and feminism that allowed women autonomy. Before that, the natural order was in place. So that's incels.
Oh my God.
The irony is this manosphere includes the opposite, not the opposite, but the flip side of the coin, which is pickup artists.
Well, wait a minute. Just want to say something about the incels. I did run across this at some point. I'm not exactly sure how. And one of the leaders of the incels became a non-incel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He found a woman who actually wanted to sleep with him.
Yes.
Fucking miracle, if you ask me. And he didn't know what to do because he thought he would be thrown out of that community,
Yes.
which says to me that they are celebrating their misery. They are wallowing in their self-pity. If women did this, they would say, oh, you're so emotional. You just can't be trusted with the reins of government or anything else. But they seem to, it's not a state that they want to actually leave. They seem to like it. They like misery. We always say misery loves company. Apparently it really does.
Yes. There is a book called Black Pilled by a woman named Ellie Reeve, and she tells this story of an incel who has sex for the first time with a woman who essentially views virgins as a fetish. So there was an expiration date on the relationship or how long this could last. They realized that they had lost their very high position, their status in the community. They were a moderator. They were what they called a wizard in that community.
A wizard, right.
A wizard, yes. And the thing is, what happens if someone does finally have sex in that community, they get a lot of hate thrown at them.
They get hate.
They get hate. They don't get celebrated. It's almost treated like a betrayal. So it's a very toxic stew.
So they're wallowing in their grievance and they don't want to solve a problem. If they had a problem, which is based on all kinds of nonsense, but still, if they wanted to solve this problem, they would want to reduce their community to zero.
Right.
So that everybody in it could be happy.
Right.
But they don't want to be happy. They're not celebrating people's happiness. It's just like they're celebrating their failure. Wow, that is crazy.
So another aspect of this community is looking for more success, which is the pickup artists.
The pickup artists, right? Those are the tens. Those are the Chads.
That's a group of they've existed forever. Pickup artists. I mean, certainly since the 50s or 60s, I believe.
There were always books for men.
Yes.
About like pickup lines and things like that.
Right, exactly. How do you win over women? What are the best pickup lines? What do women want? How do you
right.
Teaching them how to be, successful in the marketplace, in the dating marketplace.
Right.
On its surface, not necessarily such a bad thing, but
it's harmless. I mean,
it used to be.
I mean, men are, kind of tongue-tied sometimes. So, this might be a good thing.
Except for the way that it actually manifests, which is that it includes a lot of misogynistic ideas about the innate differences between men and women that reinforce misogynistic stereotypes.
Uh-huh.
So that's sort of the flip side of the incel world. And then there are, men's rights activists who are part of this stew. And those are people that believe that men have a raw deal
Yeah.
in society, women have advantages that men don't have in society, etc.
Which advantages were those again?
Well, one of their big issues is they believe that women have advantages in family court.
That's been around for years. There was a movie called Kramer versus Kramer with Meryl Streep and Dustin Hoffman. Was it Dustin Hoffman? I'm not sure.
Yes.
But it was all about that.
Yeah.
And it ended up with them getting joint custody, and everyone said, oh, that's a good idea. At least in California, they will grant joint custody whenever they can,
Right.
recognizing that both parents are, helpful in a child's life.
And, a lot of the data also shows that probably the biggest factor within family law has to do with how much money
Oh, yeah.
the person has.
Oh, yeah, because they would take children away from mothers because the man could drive that woman into the ground
Yes.
legally. She could not possibly have afforded all of the things that were thrown at her. And if you put one toe out of line, it is blown up to the Sodom and Gomorrah levels of a harlot and all of this stuff. Whereas the man can be a philandering jerk and his money will trump a mother who really wants to have custody of her kids, who's a very good mother.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a really sore subject. It's another fantasy that men are being mistreated. In the cases that I was involved in, you would have a woman who had put her husband through medical school or put her husband through law school. And then at the end of it, the man has found a sweet job with lots of money and a nice new wife. And he just basically steals the kids because he has the resources to pay for it and the legal shenanigans that allow that to happen, and she cannot possibly match it. I have seen this over and over, and they talk about them being mistreated in family court. Law, I will tell you, in this country is mostly based on who has the money. And in that forum, women will never win.
Yes. So there's a lot wrong that these communities have on the
Yeah.
way the world really works. Even though they seem disparate in some ways, the thing that unites them is that they believe that feminism has essentially destroyed America.
Okay. And feminism is defined how?
Well, that's a good question. I think when they're talking about feminism, in large part, they're talking about the sexual revolution.
But what's the underlying sentiment?
Okay, I think the underlying, let's go back to Gamergate, because I think that can be kind of instructive. I think one of the things that animated Gamergate was that the young men felt that their space, video games, was being invaded.
Mm-hmm.
That women were participating in something that they felt rightfully belonged to them.
Uh-huh.
The messages that these young men get from the peddlers of this information, and we'll get to them soon, is that the world used to be set up properly. The way the world was set up was that men were in charge. They were the head of the household. The woman stayed at home, looked after their kids, and the men were the providers. They had jobs, and that was the way that society ought to function. It wasn't just that that was beneficial to them, because they also talk about evolutionary psychology. So they refer to the cavemen are predisposed to being hunter-gatherers, and the women are genetically designed to take care of the kids. And they use genetics and biology to support their arguments. And they talk about this world that had a certain structure, And the
Right.
idea is that feminism came in and blew that up. And now everything's completely out of whack.
Oh my gosh, this is still going on. 50 to 60 years later, they're still sore about this. I mean, it's like the 50s never ended. I mean, we talked about this when we talked about the 50s, but let's talk about this just for a second. We tried that. That was the lot of women for most of history. For all of history, women have been trying to get out from under that. And the 50s being the snapshot of what was going on, the alcoholism, the drug abuse, the the violence in families, the toll that it took on those women to be crammed into those roles that mostly didn't suit them. I mean, some people want to be caretakers and that's all they want to be. And some men want to be caretakers and that's all they want to be. And that's fine. If that's your thing, go for it. But we know what it was like for those women. And it was especially acute in the 50s because it happened after they were in the workforce for years and they were doing every job that men had done. They were factory workers and riveters and they were pilots and they were baseball players and they were all of these things and they showed that they could do the job just as well. And then they were ceremoniously kicked out of the economy. Some of them were happy to do it, I'm sure. But some people said, I want a career. I want to do what I continue to do and show my stuff. I have dreams just like you do. We already know that doesn't work. And that, structure is very helpful to people. Everybody knows their place, but it's very helpful to the people who are on top. They like that just fine. And they think that anybody beneath them who they have their foot on the neck of, when they complain about their station in life, they're just bitches. They're just whiners. They're just complainers. And if they really knew what was good for them, they would accept their role. And that's where religion comes in a way. It reinforces the notion that it's God's will that you do this. So we tried that. We know it. It doesn't work. It's a bunch of nonsense. And let me tell you something. I was thinking about this yesterday. Let me tell you something about the biological part of this. It is true that only women can bear children. And let me tell you something. That's hard. That is the hardest thing you will ever do, is give birth to a child. I mean, that's not for the faint-hearted. But fortunately, God also gave us the temperament and the hormones to protect our children. The most ferocious warrior on this planet is a woman who is protecting her children. If you want to see somebody who is really fierce, biological imperative to be fierce, just talk to a mother who's trying to protect her kids. I mean, who was the greatest sniper in the Russian army during World War II? It was a woman. How many people do you know who were generals and leaders of their tribes who were protecting their families? It was women. Yeah, you can say we have a biological imperative to have children, but it's not to stay home. Because if we think that the world would be a much better place for our children if we changed the laws, then we are going to be the fiercest advocates of gun control and, abolishing landmines and creating pathways for people to get out of war. It doesn't mean we stay home to say that we take care of our kids. There are lots of ways that you can protect our kids. There used to be a poster in the 60s that's with a flower on it, and it was the Women's Strike for Peace, and it said, "War is not good for children and other living things." This notion that because you have children, you get to stay home to take care of them. No, you do whatever you need to take care of them. And that means running for office.
Yeah. You talking about this idea from decades ago of trying to hold down women to keep them in their place. A lot of the current media that exists within the manosphere is designed to invoke that very idea. So unfortunately, I want to show you a few clips just so
Okay.
you get a sense of what this milieu is like. Let me just give a little context. So this is a podcast, and this young woman right now is reading a comment from one of the viewers who's watching the podcast in real time.
Okay.
First, girl, serious advice. You need to stop making decisions and choices. Find a man in your family who is sensible and who really cares about you, and just take their advice seriously. Also, ban feminism. It's truly poison. Okay, you guys are all just like really misogynistic.
No, how do you define misogyny? Are you okay? Like, do you want to go as in leave? Is it because I asked how you define misogyny? Is that?
I don't know. He's asking me to abandon feminism. It's like, do you even know what feminism is? So you're already talking about like pornography and like no man is gonna marry. Like, yes, there are men that will marry women that do pornography, but you were also talking about how there's a lot of men that are judgmental of that. Can I please go home?
If you want to leave, you can leave. I was hoping we could continue having a conversation, but
I think that was the first time in her life she was faced with like the truth of and the consequences of her actions. And
So
What are they talking about?
So basically what that conversation is, so this is a podcast called the Whatever Podcast. And what this guy does, I don't even know his name. I don't care to know it. But he brings on OnlyFans models. OnlyFans models are basically girls who get naked and charge people money to see them naked, right?
Oh,
It's sex work online, essentially.
Uh-huh.
So he brings in OnlyFans models and some other conservative people, and he brings them on to ostensibly talk about relationships. But then he just shames them the entire time for being, sex workers. It's really sick because the reason these young women are coming onto the show is because they know that this show's audience is going to pay money to see them.
Right.
But the reason he's bringing them onto the show in order to shame them and make clips like that, where this young woman becomes incredibly uncomfortable because she realizes that she's in a room with this misogynist and she's not prepared to have this conversation.
Right.
And so they take clips of her crying about it and share it online so everyone can shame her. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? That's like a common type of clip that's going around in this ecosystem.
You mean with bringing on women for the purpose of shaming them?
Yeah, in the manosphere. And they talk about abortion. Charlie Kirk goes on this show to debate models about abortion and shame them for their lifestyle, and also so that they can portray the average woman as being,
A Jezebel.
exactly.
The average woman as being a Jezebel?
That's
oh my
right.
Goodness gracious.
Those are representation of what women's values are.
Okay,
today.
so the incels want dates, but they also want to shame women for their lifestyle choices. That's really a bad way to get a date. First of all, if you want to get naked online and do that, I mean, my opinion is just stay safe. As long as you're safe, as far as I'm concerned, it's a very good way to redistribute income from rich men to women. That's a really good idea. You girls, go for it. That's what I think of that. Now, to come on to a trap like this, they have to keep their marketing hats on, truthfully.
Yeah.
They have to be able to just be ready for what's coming and just give it right back to them and build up their brand.
Yes.
They have to be little funny ass bitches. You can't take a guy like that very seriously.
Well, some of them do, and they don't get invited back.
I'll bet they don't get invited back because he wants to show that he's the king of the roost and that these women, this is the typical woman, right? She's very emotional. She doesn't know how to handle being bullied. I mean, most of us
She
don't.
doesn't know what she's talking about. She believes it. She doesn't even know how to define misogyny. You know what I mean?
I can define misogyny for you.
Yeah.
It's hating women, really. I mean, it's very simple, and disrespecting them. and thinking it's okay to disrespect them and feeling that they're inferior. How's that? That's a working definition. That was easy. Remember that, girls, when they ask you, that's what you tell them.
I don't think this guy would have you on his podcast.
Oh, but that would be fun. That would be hella fun. I mean, so this world is full of, it's not just a grievance. Like, oh, I can't get a date on Saturday night. It's all your fault. But it's going one step further and trying to shame women.
Yes.
And the next step, of course, is violence.
Well,
because you dehumanize these gals who are just, they're trying to make a living like everybody else. And you shame them with all this religious stuff and whatnot. And then the men feel empowered. Like, this is not actually a decent human being. This is a person, that doesn't deserve any rights, because look what they're doing. And it's a very small step from verbal abuse and verbal violence to physical violence and thinking it's okay.
Well, you might not be surprised then to hear that several incels have committed mass murder.
Really?
Yeah.
Of women?
Of women, of anybody. I mean, the school shooters that you see.
Right.
Some of them, there was a young man in Santa Barbara who, I don't know if you remember this, who killed, 5 or 6 people. He was an incel, and he was active in those communities, and he was encouraged by the people he was talking with to do it. He wrote a manifesto.
They're giving them permission. This is giving them permission to do this because it's dehumanizing women. I mean, we haven't just gone back 60 years. We've gone back a century. We've gone back 2 centuries when women's life was worth nothing, It wasn't that we couldn't vote. We couldn't be a witness in a jury trial because our testimony was considered worthless. We couldn't inherit. We couldn't have our own money. I mean, we're going back to women as chattel property.
Yes.
As we used to call it in law school. We were chattel.
Yeah. The other thing that happens when you start talking about the biological realities of different roles in society is that dovetails very quickly and easily into racism, of course.
Well, of course.
Parts of these communities are also reading books like The Bell Curve, which is about the innate IQ differences between different populations and a sales pitch for how to orient society based on those innate genetic differences between the races.
It's all been debunked. It was debunked decades ago.
It's come back.
Okay, so there's something really deeper. Who does this resonate with? It doesn't resonate. You're a white man.
Yeah.
Your brother's a white guy. It doesn't resonate with you. I imagine that you're just as horrified and sickened by this as I am. But it's resonating with somebody. I mean, is it just the backlash? Is it just that they expected to walk into a world that was their oyster, and then all of a sudden they realized that a lot of people were just as qualified as they were, and it was going to be a lot harder than they thought, welcome to my world. And then they didn't know what was going on, and they had to find somebody to blame, and there was a really easy target.
Well, let me show you one more clip, and then we'll explore that question a little more, because this is going to help us transition.
Okay.
So this is just to show, there's not much logic to this clip, but this is how misogyny combines with other forms of discrimination.
Everything, every issue, every ailment in society, you could tie it back to feminism. Every single one. Feminism. Who pushed feminism? The fucking Jews. Gloria Steinem, etc. Who pushed homosexuality? The Jews. See, these are the conversations they don't want you to hear. Right? This is what I mean when I tell y'all. I would rather be honest with you guys and keep it 1,000 and say what the it really is than having to bite my fucking tongue. I'm not biting my tongue for no fucking Jews, niggas, Asians, Pajites, stinky Indians, that shit. Blacks, Arabs, even Arabs, I criticize them. I'm not biting my tongue. I call it like it is. Facts are facts regardless of who fucking says them. Anyway, rant over. We can keep going on with this fucking stupid ass bitch. But I'm telling y'all, all the problems we have in society, you can always tie it back to fucking feminism. And then you figure out who started feminism, all the isms, communism, feminism, Marxism, socialism. Who always starts it? The dreidel spinners.
So, there's
He looks like a black guy,
he is a black guy.
so he hates himself.
He's incredibly racist.
Boy, I'll say.
I mean, there's not much to learn from that clip other than to say the milieu of anti-feminism, it also includes anti-Semitism, anti-homosexuality, and racism.
I mean, some of these people are just not playing with a full deck, or they have serious anger issues that are going to manifest in some very unfortunate way at some time in the future. Somebody talking like that, what problems are you solving? How are you making anyone's life better? What is the vision of your future? What's your purpose on this planet? To spew hate? I mean, what can I say about somebody like that?
Well, so here's the thing. These messages, do any of these things sound new to you?
No, none of them are new. None of them.
Right. They've been with us forever. I mean, they're packaging it in a new technology, in a new medium, in a new media ecosystem, but it's the same arguments.
But someone is listening to them.
Exactly.
That's what I don't understand. Why? Why do people listen to this and say, that makes a lot of sense? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't make any sense. But why does it make sense to you? What's going on with you? Going back to young men, which is kind of where we started. When you are 18 to 30 years old, this should be the most idealistic time you will ever have in your life, where you believe that you can change the world, where you want to change the world. You want to make the world a better place. You think that everybody that came before you doesn't know what they're talking about, and only you do, which is fine. It's good. It's the power of youth. And what do we get? We get a generation of kids, of young men who sound like they're in their 80s. They started out idealistic, and then, life happened and they got beat up by it, because I guarantee you, life will definitely beat you up. And then they kind of lost their way, and they're very bitter, and they're looking back at their life going, what went wrong? It must be the feminists. I mean, when your 80-year-old cousin says that, you grew up in the 50s. These guys are in their 20s. If you think life has beaten you up, you have no idea what's coming, because life beats us all up. You should be out there with your generation fighting climate change, which is causing an apocalyptic, situation
right outside my window,
right outside your door.
Yeah.
You should, I was thinking, who do we need? We need to push back on this thing. I mean, the other thing was, who did they blame? They blamed the fire chief, who's a lesbian. It was just like, it's just hilarious. But, I mean, we're counting on you. We're counting on young people to save the planet. But you're stewing about not getting a date on a Saturday night and blaming who? Your mother? Your aunt? Your cousin? Your sister? Your sister's friend? Who are these women who are taking this away from you? I mean, there's something that's really just not right.
Yeah, I think that's the good question. When we were talking about immigration last time, you said Donald Trump had been talking about this for decades and no one listened, but suddenly there was a receptive audience.
Right.
So I think that's one question to contend with. Why is there a receptive audience for this message? And what I will say, not to excuse the views or the behaviors of these young men, this is a generation of young men that is growing up in a world that is seeing fewer options and opportunities for them than the generation before them. They're blaming they're blaming feminism for that. And that's what they're being told is the reason. So it is true. They're seeing not as many good jobs available to them. There's lack of community space for them. They have less of a prospect of getting married and having kids and buying a home. You know, there are material things that are creating this sense of loss that they, you know, and they're being told this message, of course. So I think that's part of why they're receptive to it. And the question is, and this was kind of a debate online in leftist space for a while, a year or so ago, which is there a better message that can be sent to young men from progressives? How do you counter a message coming from the right that says, hey, you know what? You should be in charge. Feminism and wokeness and DEI and whatever, this is the message to white men, they're coming and taking what's rightfully yours. You should be in charge. That's pretty appealing to a young man who's feeling alienated and disempowered.
Right.
How do you tell a message that's more effective than that one?
Well, you know, AOC sent out an email to people in her district. She wanted to know why they voted for her and voted for Donald Trump. And the guys who wrote back said, because you really care about working people. And we think Donald Trump cares about working people, which is like, you have to have a hole in your head to think that. But that's what they said. So, you know, that's one way you just counter it. And the other way is you get some reality into this situation. I mean, it is true that there's a lot more competition now, and there would be if it was only white men in the marketplace, because you're competing with people from all over the world now, because the oligarchs, with the help of both the Republican and the Democratic Party, sent your jobs overseas. They did. They sent them to Mexico and Canada and Vietnam and China and all of these other places so that there would be a bigger bottom line for them. They sent your jobs overseas. Joe Biden, of all people, Joe Biden was the first person in decades to bring those jobs back and to build manufacturing plants on any scale that was designed to help exactly what they were talking about. Apparently that it just they didn't believe it, or they didn't know. It's possibly they didn't know because Joe's really bad about telling people what he was up to.
Yes.
But, you know, they're looking in the wrong place. I mean, my message to you guys is you are looking in the wrong place. Look up. Don't look at your sister who wants to go to law school and blame her for taking the rightful law job of some rube who wants to go to law school and, you know, can't write a decent sentence. That's not the way it is. What's going on is they outsourced your jobs so that they could make more money. They have now made more money than God, and they're not sharing it with anybody who works for them.
Right.
They get poorer and poorer while the rich get richer and richer. And you're blaming your mother?
Right.
I mean, you're looking in the wrong place. You guys have these communities. Get together and figure out what the truth is and what you can do about it, because you could actually affect change that would help you in your life. But you're voting for the wrong party. And blaming women for it is not going to create anything. It's not, I mean, it just makes you a very unappealing person for a woman who wants to go on a date.
That's
like,
for
hi,
sure.
honey, you don't know me, but I think we should get married and you should stay home and watch the kids and raise my children and cook my dinner and clean my house and be very pretty and available to me whenever I want, and you should have no dreams and no aspirations of anything except serving me. How does that sound? Like, next.
Yeah. The other thing is this problem seems to be only getting worse. I looked at some data recently and
Oh,
okay, I got to look into this.
okay.
Yeah.
Is it coming your way?
Yeah, I got to look into this.
Okay.
Let me stop this and I'm going to look into see what's going on, okay?
Okay.
So you
I'll turn on my phone.
All right, false alarm. I don't know if I'll keep this in the episode. Maybe I will, just to so
Right.
people can see what it's like to live under climate catastrophe.
Right. We should say that.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, just a real quick detour. I'm in LA. I know people whose homes have burned down. It's scary. I'm safe though for now. And there's also a lot of misinformation going on out there online. So don't believe everything you read right away.
This is why we need young men to get out of their bunkers, get offline, and go out and help solve the climate crisis. Make something good of your life. You know, that spark of idealism, I can't believe that you never had it. You must have had it, because I'm telling you, we need you. The world needs you. The planet needs you.
Yeah. You know, we were talking about this message and why it's falling on receptive ears and how they're looking in the wrong direction. I also think neoliberal capitalism does not really offer a good alternative to the story that, hey, you should be in charge. The alternative from our current system of capitalism is, no, you're going to have to fight it out with all these other people. And I
Right.
think part of the story, you know, they harken back to the story from the 50s where men were in charge, and that's true. And as we noted in our episode about the 50s that everyone should watch, is that was all made possible by a very different paradigm. It was made possible because of the New Deal paradigm that included union membership, well-paying jobs. A single person could, at that time, support a household. You know, when feminism happened and women started joining the workforce, you could have kept that New Deal paradigm and just included everyone else. But what happened instead was suddenly we shifted to an economy where the capitalist billionaire class said, since the mom and the dad are working, let's make it so that you need both people to work in order to support a household. And it coincided with the fall of communism. Suddenly there was no impetus to say, you know, during communism, they had to show that, yes, capitalism can create a decent life for Americans. And so they tempered their worst instincts. When communism fell, which also coincided with women and black people joining the workforce, Ronald Reagan and those freaks, they changed the paradigm. We don't live in the New Deal paradigm. We live in a different, more a vampire version of capitalism. If I were to say that there's a better message for young men, it's to envision a world where everyone gets a piece of the pie, but the pie is just that much bigger.
Yeah.
And that you can actually get more and everyone else can get more. I think that some young men might be more drawn to that message. What do you think?
I think that that's true, actually. In the 50s and the 60s, men worked at the same company for decades, and they built up a pension, and they were able to retire with a pension, and they had immense job security because the bosses did not take nearly the share of the wealth that the corporations generated that they do now. And, you know, you call it vampire capitalism. That's really what it is, because it doesn't share the benefits of workers working harder and being more productive, that increases the bottom line. But all that money goes to the top, and none of it gets shared with the workers who are creating all that wealth. And that should make you very mad.
Yeah, you're blaming feminism, but the fact is these people took advantage of feminism and turned it into a version of capitalism where no one can succeed.
Well, let me give you a definition of feminism. If you had asked me what is feminism, I would say women are just saying, give us the same rights that you have always enjoyed. Give us the same opportunities that you've always enjoyed. Judge us by what we can do, not by our gender, not by your gender, not by the color of our skin, not by the color of your skin. We want a true meritocracy. But a meritocracy means you have to have the opportunities first. You can't keep us out of, colleges and then say, well, we'd like to promote you, but we can't because you don't have the education.
Right.
You can't do that. Give us the same playing field that you have. And while you're at it, recognize that biological imperative that you seem to be very fond of, that nature has given us the job of having children, and recognize that that's one of our responsibilities that we take very seriously, and give us childcare so that we can have a job and that our kids are in a good situation. Feminism doesn't mean give me extra rights or give me different rights or promote me over you. What it means is judge us by our merit. I have to say, this idea that the Los Angeles fires are the responsibility of the fire chief who happens to be a lesbian. I was reading a little bit about why they hired this woman who was a 22-year a firefighter and a battalion chief and a deputy chief and really earned her spurs. Before she was brought into that department, there was a lot of diversity in the fire department. They had the most diverse community of white men that you would ever believe. They had a fire captain or chief, I'm not sure what his, a fire guy who was in charge of a major fire who was drunk. They had room for him. They had a firefighter who was involved in a hit and run, but they had room for him. They had firefighters who were having sex for money on the job, who were harassing the few Black and Hispanic firefighters. So it was a very diverse population of white men. They were all welcome into that club, and they were all treated equally because none of them ever faced any consequences. That was the LA Fire Department before they started to clean house. And they brought the new person who was massively qualified for this job to help do that. And now they're blaming her.
I mean, we can acknowledge that society has let them down. We can acknowledge that their jobs have been shipped overseas. We can acknowledge that we asked them to do dangerous work that we frankly have no right for. I mean, men were in the coal mines for decades. Sure. We can acknowledge all that, but we cannot meet them halfway, 1/4 of the way, anywhere close to giving them a pass on their misogyny.
No, misogyny is defined as the hatred and devaluing of women for whatever reason, whether you think it's biological or it doesn't matter. That's what misogyny is. And it's never okay to hate, and you never give anyone permission to hate. And so, no, you need to stop that and grow up.
The other thing I want to acknowledge is that the patriarchy, which is supposed to benefit them, actually harms men in many serious and significant ways.
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, the burden that men find themselves under, they're supposed to be handsome and athletic and have a great build and be smart and funny and a Casanova and be able to get all the girls and a sharp dresser and they can dance. And they're supposed to be warriors and they're supposed to be great leaders. You never get that in anybody all together at once. You can get artists, and I mean, That's what I mean. It's very hard for them to be comfortable in their own skin because they're measuring themselves up against an absolutely absurd ideal. And what they have to understand is that women tend to like men who know who they are and are comfortable in their own skin, because men who are comfortable in their own skin and don't have to feel that they have to live up to these absurd expectations are good companions.
The other ways is, I know growing up as a young man, that there is an expectation that you are not allowed to fully feel the full range of your emotions,
Right.
that you're expected to keep it all in. And that's very unhealthy.
It's terrible. It's really, really terrible. I saw a conversation recently by a guy who was, I don't know if he was a Marine or a sniper or something in Afghanistan, and who was very damaged by his experience. And he said the thing that is healing him is learning compassion and empathy and being able to express his feelings, because he had a very hard time after he came back. He was in jail, and because we don't give them any opportunity. They have no way to process that. If you want to talk about olden days, if you want to go back to, say, even Native American people, they have ceremonies for warriors where the community rallies around them and kind of heals them after they come back from a battle. And we have no way for men to process all of the feelings that they have. They don't have to necessarily be at war, but they're like everyone else. They have their sorrows and they have their hard times. And there's no way for them to express that without being called a sissy. And that's why these stereotypes of women and men are so damaging to both of them. You are trapped in the expectations that are completely unrealistic, and you're never going to be able to be whole as long as you don't accept who you are.
The patriarchy, in many ways, trains men to be warriors and workers for the billionaire class and the military. We train men to be soldiers in their armies.
Well, Maud said in her talk at Stanford, when she was accepting an award for being one of the people who founded one of the first gay student unions in the country, she said, until gay people, for example, or women or whoever, are free, men cannot be free, because, if they show any emotion at all, they're going to be faggots and queers and sissies. And so they feel the obligation to go and fight in wars and be, brutal and cruel and stuff all their feelings down. So until we are free, they cannot be free.
Have you heard of the term red pill?
You told me about the black pill. I know it has something to do with the Matrix, right?
Yes. In the movie The Matrix, Morpheus, played by Lawrence Fishburne, holds two hands out. One hand has a blue pill, one hand has the red pill.
Uh-huh.
He says, take the blue pill, go back to your normal life as if you, with all the ignorance that you had. Take the red pill and you'll find out the truth. The idea is you take the red pill and then you find out the harsh reality within the real world, which is that feminism has destroyed everything. The irony of this, of course, is that the red pill was a metaphor created by two trans women. The directors of The Matrix would later come out as two trans women and reveal that The Matrix was all an allegory for trans identity. So
really?
Yes. So that's the irony of the red pill label. Also, the fact that essentially being red pilled to find out the truth about reality is essentially what wokeness means.
Well, of course. I mean, they have it exactly backwards. They're in the blue pill life.
Right.
Where everything is bad and, they're grumpy old men, even though they're 20 years old. The truth of the matter is you could have a life. You should have a life. We want you to have a life. It would be a good life. The world needs you. And it's not your grandmother who is the reason you can't get a job. Look up at the ruling class who finds it very advantageous to have their foot on your neck, and they find it very advantageous for you to have your foot on other people's necks.
Yes, you are their foot soldiers.
You're their foot soldiers, and you're doing a really good job. And I think this is an army you might want to desert.
Yeah. And, part of me is thinking, am I asking the right questions? How do we reach young men? When at the same time, the last thing I want to do is excuse or coddle that behavior. Because the truth is, in this last election, Donald Trump didn't get a bigger vote share. Other people stayed home.
Yeah.
And, I don't want whatever message we send still needs to push back against this manosphere crap, these people who are blaming DEI, because there is another population of people who's being victimized by this kind of ideology. And when we talk about should we reach young men, yeah, we should, but I don't want to forget about the people who they want to put their boot on the neck of.
I mean, that's exactly right. When did the United States become, the land of the, the fraidy cat and the home of the crybaby, the victim? I feel so put upon by these women who want a good job. The nerve of them. When did that happen? What's the matter with you? I almost want to slap you and say, snap out of it. You probably have a lot to give to the community that doesn't involve putting your foot on the neck of somebody who just wants to have the same life that you have and that you've always expected that you would have. And now you don't have it. Well, welcome to my world. When I was a young lawyer and I would go into the courtroom and the other lawyer would come up to you and say, my colleague wants to take you on a date. And I'm like, I don't know that guy from a hole in the wall. But if he belongs to the athletic club, I'll go play basketball with him. But they thought that was their right, that I was like their property or something.
Yeah.
And I just blew it off, but this has been going on forever.
Yeah.
And stop that. I'm going to tell you something else. A lot of the women in my generation who made it, kind of like me, we had men who helped us. Because men who are secure in who they are and what they're worth as human beings do not look down their noses on women.
Right.
They are perfectly happy to have women as partners because they're not threatened by them.
Yeah.
They just want to have partners. And I had male mentors all throughout my legal career who saw that I was really good at what I did and were willing to make a way for me. If you want to have a job in your life, be that person for somebody who doesn't have your opportunities.
Yeah.
Be that mentor. That's very sexy. Women really like that.
Yeah.
That's a tip for you. That's a free advice from me.
All right, Mom, I think that's a good place to leave it. Thanks so much, and I'll talk to you soon. Mwah. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Please help us get over that 10,000 subscriber number. I know you can do it. I know you've been watching these videos and you're like, I'm going to subscribe one of these days, and then you never do. Well, today is the day to do that. So please do that and tell us what you think in the comments, and we'll see you all next time.